So I'm the one who selected the Ezri Dax storyline, although I think Murphy suggested we do Afterimage. But I'll take at least a start of the lead because I watched this episode a couple of times and I really came around to thinking this was not about Ezri. This was about Garak and Garak's breakdown, frankly. When you try to exit an airlock into space, you're not on the ledge. You're far beyond the ledge. And at one point he does that. And it really demonstrated to me the what not only Garak, but really all spies have to go through. They have to sell out their country. They have to cost citizens of their countries their lives, even if they believe they're doing it for a right or even righteous cause. And I thought this episode did a great job on that. Everyone who's listened to this podcast knows I'm a huge Garak fan, and he's the only Cardassian I actually like. And part of it was the Obsidian Order. He's as Cardassian as you can be. He grew up that way, and he is a liar, cheater, stealer, and dissembler. And I love him. But he really goes to the depth. And I thought Andy Robinson just played it to the hilt in this episode. And I came around to thinking that him going so far down was what brought Ezri up because she went to the depths with him. And if I won't speak for you all, but I will say that some of the therapy I've been through, I took some therapists into some dark places and they had to go there to get me out. And I don't know what, I never interviewed them about the impact on them, but if you do that once or multiple times, it's got to have an impact on you as a human being as well. So I really came around to having a very different view of this episode than I did certainly when I thought about it and on first viewing. And you're seeing, we've talked about this several times, the breakdown of all of the main characters and what the war has done to them. And I saw Garak break down in a different way because of his love of his homeland and his home world. Ezri does make a comeback, or at least is able to come to grips with who she is now, who she was, and who she's going to be, hopefully in the future. But it was really O'Brien that made the change by talking to Worf. And I love Meany. Watch everything he's in. And he has a wisdom on this show that I think is just priceless. And when he tells Worf that you dishonor the memory of your deceased wife by not speaking to Ezri, that's what finally turns Worf around, and that's what turns Ezri around. I was a little put off when she cried. Officers do not cry. But she went to a darker place, but she made a comeback too. And I don't know what you guys saw or didn't see in any of that, but it really, on multiple viewings, sort of changed my perspective of what this episode was about, because I thought it was about Ezri coming to terms with being Dax. And I came out of the other side thinking it was a whole lot more than that.
I thought of a different take because, Tom, I agree with you. The most interesting part of this episode was what was happening to Garak. But I thought it could have been something, I think, that was like as emotionally impactful as Sisko's experience in the Pale Moonlight. It could have been a real mirror to that in terms of what he was going through and how he was expressing it. But I feel like Ezri being involved in that process just utterly distracted from it. And I think I've said several times, I'm not the biggest Ezri Dax fan. I think she is the worst therapist on television. And it occurred to me as I was watching this last night in preparation for today, I would like her if she wasn't a therapist. But someone who has had training in counseling should be able to occasionally read a room, should be able to not project on even going through these changes with the Dax symbiont. I think she's just so profoundly incompetent at counseling work that it absolutely tore me out of the story and really it makes me dislike the character. But I think everything else about her that may be irritating or maybe difficult is completely understandable for someone who hasn't had professional training in how to deal with others. But I just didn't like it. And I think it really took away from the emotional impact that was happening to Julian and to Worf and to Garak. I think, yeah, I was not a fan.
You have made that clear.
I've
But
been
you
waiting
gave
for
her
this
some room
moment.
for growth if she wasn't a therapist.
If she was an artist or an engineer or a cook, it would all be great. But she should be able to. She's also 14, right? Which is so. What do you think, Murphy?
You make a good point, and I think one of the things that you see later with Ezri is that all those roles that you mentioned, better soldier, better engineer, whatever, she is sort of much better at those roles. Yeah, she's not a great counselor. I like that she goes in to talk to Garak, and she basically tries to come to an assessment of his condition after 5-minute session. There we go. We solved your problem. And he's, yeah, that's great. It's just the episode. I like that it touches on Garak's claustrophobia that we sort of saw earlier when he was trapped on that Dominion planet, asteroid. There's a scene in that where we have to go into the walls and he has to fix something so they can escape. And he talks about being in some interrogation chamber or trapped somewhere where the walls are closing in on him. Well, I don't think it's as cut and dry as an Auburn sort of disciplining him as a boy, but I think he's had multiple experiences leading down this road. And I think that destruction of Cardassia, that's the collapsing image of the Cardassian state, is also laying heavily on him. It's burying him alive, literally. He addresses this later, but his predictions are absolutely true. The Cardassia that he wants to go back to will no longer exist, and he is very much making that happen. Yeah, on the other side, and Julian, what the colossal prick in the episode. I'm sorry to say, that's really rude. The way he attacks Julian and threatens Quark, and yeah, I'm starting to find the more I watch the series, I'm finding Worf very insufferable.
Insufferable. Let's explore that, because I think you're on to something here, Murphy. And I found him almost insufferable around Jadzia. What I thought was maybe that's just the way Klingons mate. They're very physical. They're very protective. They're very jealous, very possessive. But that would seem to be in some ways consistent with what I saw them, how I saw them more generally. But I really, you actually hit it. He's even worse now. And I chalk that up to grief. And nothing new, but everyone goes through grief differently. And we have seen Worf have grief literally since TNG.
Yeah.
And it's been different because he's a Klingon. But he has moved into almost just whiny. And that's what I saw a little bit in this role. And that's why O'Brien kind of slapping him out of it was so significant to me. But he has gone, I don't want to say to a dark place, but a place none of us like. And I think you're spot on there.
Yeah, I think whiny is a really good way to describe seventh season Worf. Again, we discussed it, Brian must suffer, but it's really Worf must suffer. He never gets a break.
Megan?
No, I think that's true. And I think it's a good point that everyone deals with grief in their different ways. And it's just, I think it was maybe a little too much to ask for him to be around the Dax symbiont so soon. Ezri, it's in a new person, it's a new personality, but they made a light reference to the point that you're not really supposed to associate with previous spouses, family, friends in your rejoined life as a newly joined Trill. And it seems kind of, Worf isn't someone who seems like he needs a lot of coddling, but to have that rubbed in his face every day, someone who has all of these memories of this past life where he was so much happier, it's just wildly inconsiderate on everyone's part, I think. I think O'Brien did the best he could in making the best of the situation, but I think it was shoddy of Cisco to make that happen. And I think it was irresponsible of the Trill Commission to allow it. And I think also poor judgment on Ezri's part. I think it all kind of contributed to the whiny situation. Like, Worf could handle himself better about it, no question. But I think he was put in a fairly unreasonable situation.
Dax also flouts that a lot. She has a tendency to really associate with people from her past very heavily in a way that the Symbiosis Commission would be like, could you please not? Yeah.
Maybe Worf and Jadzia got on so well because the Daxambian's kind of an ass. They were jerks in a really complimentary fashion.
I think Curzon has an outside influence on Jadzia's personality, and Curzon is definitely a bit of an ass. Yeah. I don't know with the other Dax hosts, so some of them seem pretty meek or whatever, but there's that one that Julian and I think it's Tobin or Sirius, one of the two. He's like Burkokian. He seems like the kind of person who would, do the same thing. But yeah, Dax is pretty plays it loose with the rules.
What did each of you think of that moment when Ezri Dax told Julian if it hadn't been Worf, it would have been him?
No, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I want to actually ask you about Cisco in this episode,
Mhm.
because the first time I watched it, I was really irritated with Cisco because I thought he used too much negative psychology, more than I had seen him do. And you guys may correct me on, no, he did more on certain episodes. And it apparently, it started off, it didn't work. I've had bosses who did that to me, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Did that help move Dax forward or even the story for you guys?
I don't know. I had the slightly irreverent thought that perhaps it was just fan service, because when Garak was ranting at Ezri and when Cisco was ranting at her, I was just like, these are all objectively correct statements. Left this plainly. I think it was warranted. I think this is very young, but still in Starfleet, practically an officer, became an officer over the course of the episode, should be able to handle herself better. Or not be in the situation. Also an option. Remove oneself from the situation. I think Cisco was right to do it.
Murphy?
I think he definitely wants her around. He has a listening memory of both Curzon and Jadzia sort of playing rough with him and pushing him to get what needs to be done. And I think he's returning the favor to an old friend. I also don't think that Ezri is probably the best choice for counselor for people who have been in battle for so long. Maybe if you want a counselor on the station, get someone who's a little more seasoned. I don't know.
That's a great point, Murphy.
Yeah, she seems a little inexperienced. Also, I have questions. This doesn't really pertain to the plot at all, but I was just a curiosity. The only holosuites on the station are owned by Korg. We know the other than is permanently running for Vic Fontaine's lounge. And then Ezri ties up another one open 26 hours a day just for Garak. Like, how many holosuites does he have? And that's a lot of power running around the clock for 5 people who, and one person who needs to sit on a cliff. It just struck me as an interesting little thing. I don't know.
That's a great
For
question.
some reason, I always thought there
that.
were 4.
That's what I
Four
thought.
feels right.
4 feels right. Yeah. There's not a lot of space upstairs. Yeah.
I really changed my view of not so much Ezri, but the way they introduced her cleaned her up in this episode and made her a permanent part of the crew, because I originally thought it was very cool. Now I'm not so sure. Other than Garak's story, do you think we move the storyline forward in this episode in the ways, even certainly the Symbols episode was for us with multiple storylines? Or did we just have to tie off Ezri, and Garak started off as an afterthought, but in my mind, he became the primary protagonist? Any thoughts on that one way or the other?
I thought this kind of felt like almost a reset episode. Like Ezri gets in and is the new Jadzia. Worf gets back to being functional after Jadzia is safely in Sto-vo-kor. Garak has his emotional breakthrough. I wouldn't call it filler, because I think it was important that these things happen and we had to get the introduction to the new character. But I think it was very much part of it was the final bit of the opening to the season. I think it was a capstone more than an advancement episode.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty spot on. It's one of those episodes. I think you only see Nerys in the beginning and the very end of the episodes. It's not really pivotal, but it is in the context of establishing Worf and Ezri's relationship towards the end of the season, because they go off and do a whole bunch of stuff and yada yada. But getting her in position to sort of wrap up that endgame story early on is kind of nice. And like you said, it tied up the last one.
So I guess my final thoughts on this episode is I probably love Garak more than I did before this episode started. I've known a couple of guys who were in that service in the United States, and they had been either undercover or run undercover agents. And they just said at some point, literally their body said, we have to leave. You have to leave. And it was that sort of emotional groundswell for whatever reason, for them. So I'm fairly convinced that's a real thing. It's beyond what I see on TV shows. As I've said several times, I love Andy Robinson. I love the character. And I thought the airlock scene was fabulous. And it showed the depth of what Garak was going through. I won't give too much of a spoiler alert, but I loved when he goes back to Cardassia for the first or final time at the end of the series. And it tied together for me that moment for him. I really enjoyed this episode from that perspective. I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I was going to for the Ezri part, but it worked for me for Garak. Yeah. What about you guys on final thoughts?
Final thoughts.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, I think ultimately my final takeaway from watching it, my last note was, it's too bad that the Dax symbiote has no friends or family anywhere else in the universe that she could spend time with. Maybe that would have been a better situation for everybody.
We do meet Ezri's family, and they're kind of awful and insufferable.
Yeah, more friends probably from other symbiote experiences. Anyway, I think the whole premise to me, I think, is a little bit shoehorned. And that was, for me, confirmed by this episode.
Murphy?
Yeah, I agree with you. I love the Ezri Robinson. He's so great. He was great in Dirty Harry, and he's great in that first Hellraiser movie. He's so good. That man has such an expressive face that I was reading something about the claustrophobia idea ties into Ezri Robinson's actual claustrophobia. And how it was a reflection of him having to be in that heavy makeup to traps, feeling when he's being intense. But yeah, it's a nice start to the season, I suppose. We got to get to know Ezri somehow. We can't just throw her onto the Defiant and have an adventure. She's got to do something. And not easy to come up with rules for a character in the game. I mean, think of like character control episodes in TNG. They're always weird and funky and often have very little to do with their counseling. Yeah.
All right. Interesting takes from everyone. And I can't wait to when we start our next round. So till next time, guys.
Have a good one.